Alain, I wanted to ask you first, sort of broadly, about the vision that you put forth in Religion for Atheists, which is a kind of utopian sort of look at or restructuring or reformation of secular society. And I thought maybe just sort of broadly you could lay out some of the ideas in the book.
I suppose my starting point is secular society has not worked everything out. In other words, once we reject religion, if we reject religion, we still have some gaps. There are some problems with the way secular society runs. And it struck me that many of these gaps could best be understood through the prism of religion. That we have secularized, I say in my book, we've secularized badly in the sense that we've thrown out a lot of stuff which was associated with religion and which is now absent from contemporary secular life, but which we would do well to revisit. So what I do is look systematically through three faiths, Christianity, Buddhism, and Judaism, asking myself always one question: what here might we use? What here might inspire? Is there stuff here that we've left behind that we could, in giving up the doctrinal side of religion, nevertheless have benefited from? That's my starting point. And so I look at areas like community, education, ethical structure, art and architecture, the notion of an institution, which of course the faiths are, and a few other things besides.
And you have some sort of very specific proposals, examples from religious life that you essentially would like to see secularized and incorporated into the wider society. Perhaps you can sort of expound upon some of those.
Sure. Well, one of the areas that I look at is education. And it strikes me that religions are in a way giant educational machines. Now, in the secular world, we take education really seriously. And a lot of money is devoted to institutes of higher education. And when people are trying to understand why we educate, one answer is skills for jobs, for the economy, to compete, to be a competitive economy. That's simple enough. But there's another more noble sounding ambition which creeps in during the more lyrical passages of politician speeches or graduation ceremonies. And that's the idea that education should be a source of guidance, that it should help you to live, that it should be an education of your soul. It should help you to find meaning, consolation, ethical structure. In other words, that's quite a religious ambition. And in my book, what I do is I trace it and I say that started in the 19th century. As church attendance began to collapse in many parts of Western Europe, people asked themselves the question, how are we going to replace many of these good things from religion? Ethics, structure, meaning. And an influential group of people like Matthew Arnold and John Stuart Mill came up with what I think remains a really intriguing idea. They said culture will replace scripture, culture with a capital C, the plays of Shakespeare, the dialogues of Plato, the novels of Jane Austen. In these texts, in these works, there are possibilities for replacing a lot of the direction and ethics and structure of organized religions. Now, I think it's an intriguing idea. It's also an idea that has totally disappeared. I mean, if you pitched up at a modern university, say you went to Harvard or Cambridge University or Oxford, and you said, the reason I'm here is that I want to learn how to live and die. I want to know what's good and bad. I want to find meaning. I want to cope with my own mortality. The guys would be dialing the number for the insane asylum. It's simply not an ambition that we're allowed to bring to bear upon secular education. And I think the reason for that is there's an idea that basically people are, once you're an adult, you're kind of together. You don't need particular help. The business of life is simple. You need to get married and have a family and find a job you love and watch your parents die and confront your own mortality and then put yourself in a coffin. But basically all of that is easy. You kind of know how to do it if you're an adult. And the only people who need help are stupid people, and they read self-help books. That's the kind of dominant secular elite ideology. So the idea of relevance and assistance and didacticism is absent. Now, if you look at religions start from a completely different point of view. Their view is we're all of us only just holding it together. We are desperate, we are vulnerable, and we need assistance right through every stage of life. We need wisdom. And I don't necessarily agree with the wisdom that is on offer through religions. I agree intermittently. But I'm fascinated by the analysis of our fragility. I think that's fascinating and true, truer than the secular model. And that leads me to think that if I was the emperor of all space and time, I would want to rejig how wisdom is transmitted down the generations. I would argue that the humanities should go back to that 19th century vision, that neo-religious vision of using culture as scripture. I think that remains a very good idea, sadly neglected. So that's where I'd be.
More than neglected, probably assaulted. If you look, I certainly within the United States, we now only have 100,000 college graduates a year majoring in any branch of the humanities.
Yeah.
All of these institutions like Harvard and Yale began to train ministers. They made that transition, the one you referred to as expounded by Arnold and Mill. But you know, in major universities, departments, philosophy departments are being shut. University of Albany just shut down all their foreign language departments, their classics department. In some ways, didn't that experiment fail?
Yes, I think the fault is, I mean, often people say, you know, the world is crass and materialistic, and the fault for this is, you know, governments or horrible donors or stupid students, you know, etc. I have to say, with respect, the fault really lies in the humanities themselves, that they have failed to properly make a case for their importance. Their vision of scholarship has unfortunately been hijacked by a sort of neo-scientific idea that research is what matters, and that one can research, you know, poetry like one can research a scientific problem. And this has put generations of students off, that the humanities have committed suicide by being so cut off from the questions. I mean, it's extraordinary when you think about it. There is enormous innate interest in the question of how to live. I mean, it's everywhere. The idea that the humanities departments have reached a stage where they are so cut off from the spontaneous curiosity of people that they're having to shut down, the problem lies with these departments. They have simply failed to analyze the needs of their audiences and to realize that the material they're sitting on, the culture they are sitting on, is a resource to live by, and that if they handled it like that, their departments would be opening rather than closing.
This is Harold Bloom's argument. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff on the Western canon. And of course he faults the academic hierarchy itself,
Yeah,
which I think you're doing.
Yeah, they've brought it upon themselves. I feel sorry for them. Many innocent people are, you know, being sacrificed in the name of this corrupt ideology. But, you know, we all know it, you know it. There is appetite out there for knowledge, wisdom, structured argument, etc. And yet, weirdly, it goes on outside the university. The university has, which should have been the center, it should have been our monasteries, it should have been the place outside of the press of capitalism where the best arguments could be made and rehearsed and wisdom taught and transferred. That dream, and it really is a dream, it's a dream written into the architecture of America's colleges for the most part. That dream has been betrayed and they're paying a financial price. And while I'm sorry, I can only think they have brought it upon themselves.
Well, Bloom would argue that for those who truly grasp, as you point out, the importance of art and literature, there's no place for them anymore within the university. These people have to exist outside the university, and I think you would sort of agree with that.
That's right. Yeah. The problem is, of course, they are disorganized and then weak. And one of the things that religion teaches us is if you want to get something to have power in the world, you need to organize, you need to self-organize. So, you know, the problem of the lone, you know, would-be academic in their bedroom writing a book, you know, it's much weaker. And if you look at how powerful religions are, it's because of their capacity to organize themselves properly. And it was that Mill and Arnold's dream was the secular world will organize itself around the universities. It's failed to do that.
Right. And so you propose to create new institutions.
Well, I certainly propose a method of rescuing our existing ones, recreating departments along, you know, it seems striking to me that the departments in higher education all reflect academic disciplines rather than questions of the soul. So you have a literature department, which is a completely nonsensical category. really what a literature department is a literature of, is a department of human relationships. That's really what it's about. So let's have the department of human relationships. Let's have the department of loving and dying, not the department of anthropology or whatever. So the fact the academic discipline comes first is part of the sickness of the university. It's part of